Hi everyone, yes, so welcome to an amazing new Monday with me, RESTRUCTURING Elise, and our HR2023 business restructuring. Where we're at in this season with our business education is we are in the educational mindset of the office environment that are being restructured. And when we learn that the office environment are being restructured, we learn that the office environment in our generation has got that requirement to be the office that provides for everyone in our society and in our group of people. And when we talk about a group of people, we talk about humanity in the completeness on earth. And we are emphasizing the season on the South African office environment and the South African requirement to restructure, the South African requirement to have processes in place that provides in the completeness of what is required for every person in South Africa. And we have learned that for many years the South African government was somewhat able to provide, and they were somewhat not providing for half of a generation of people and for half of a community of people. And when we say a generation of people, we remind ourselves of a situation in Africa that is a poverty state and has been a poverty state for years. And when we look at the aggression in our generation, we look at the circumstance that involves the South African citizen that has to do with the aggression that is happening in Africa in general. And when we look at the South African citizen today, we look at the baby RESTRUCTURING Elise, that is the baby born in South Africa, that is the parenting right of the parent of South Africa to be able to have what's required for the baby born in South Africa. We have that we don't only talk about a baby born, but we talk about your birthright, about your family line, about where you are from in a generation that has countries and people that have traveled from different countries and that today find themselves all in South Africa. And all of our parents we learn has met parents. And all of our parents we learn has traveled from somewhere, and the South African colored child, the South African child, the South African white European Afrikaner child has traveled from somewhere, and the family found themselves in South Africa. And while people have traveled many years to the borders of South Africa, many families have birthed and many children were born in season, we learned that with all the communications of where the children were from, the communication lines was that someone else wanted the country to be managed this way, someone else wanted the process to be managed another way, and someone else wanted the process to be managed in a different way. And that is where the South African aggression in South Africa today is that exactly speak of every communication, every family line, every country that the different person and families in South Africa are from, that are giving their opinion on behalf of their families and that are giving their opinion for the rights of their families in certain countries to be provided for. We have then learned that according to all of the communications that came in, the African child in South Africa were told that you are from Africa. The European child in South Africa that is called the Afrikaner was told you are from Europe. And the colored child in South Africa was told you are a mixture of children from the Chinese family line, from the European family line, from different family lines that has called you to be the colored of South Africa, and that today looks like the Brazilian child, today looks like the Mexican child, today looks like different Afrikaner children that find themselves the colored child in South Africa and that finds themselves the child of those different family lines. The New Zealand family line also forms part of the colored child of South Africa, the islanders in New Zealand. And while we learn that South Africa is of such, that the requirement to restructure the process and the process that are being required to be managed on a governmental level. Because if not managed in a way that the country in its completion are being managed and are being restructured and makes provision for everyone in the country, then the people in the country would find themselves constantly in aggression, because this one wants to manage the process, because Europe sends a message to the education department, China sends a message to the television teams, America sends a message to the celebrity and the other teams in South Africa, and the process are constantly disrupted. The process are constantly corrupted. The process are constantly abusive to the African birth child that finds themselves today. They're not only in Africa only, but in different international countries. Because you are South African, they ask you, where are you from? You say South Africa, they say your government is in aggression, and people in international countries find themselves in challenge many times by all of those abusive management processes, corruptive management processes, and manipulative management processes, and only therefore a generation in such aggression are required to be restructured, are required to be managed in a way that they do not find themselves being transformed into what another person's opinion wants them to be transformed at, but they find themselves in that is the business requirement of the country. And there is not only a business by a business owner, but there is every person in the country, every aspect of business and organization, every financial income and support in the country, and every structure in the country that is that provided for the employee, for the society, for the managerial leader, for the completeness of everyone that then finds themselves today in South Africa. Therefore, we are in that education that we are not going to find ourselves being disrupted, but disrupted by someone who tells us that your business or your opinion, RIBEA, is that no one listens to and that no one reacts on. It is that opinion that RIBEA Elise affirm on, and that even the South African government and the international governmental leaders find themselves having to listen to our opinion, even if they want to call us for business, even if they want to listen to our opinion into how the countries need to be restructured. They do not have a say anymore in where we find ourselves at, but our business owners is that we say you own your opinion, you press through with that, you give the information through, you educate them in a way that they are going to have to implement processes. It is non-abusive to everyone that finds themselves humanity and the amazingness of earth and in the amazingness of this universe. It is that RIBEA Elise said, I'm very firm on my social media pages. I do anything and everything, and I'm not an abusive person. I'm not an aggressive person. I'm not going to do things to disrupt people. But we are in a season where we are requiring everyone to accept everyone to be that is them in their season, and your opinion, and not being transformed to what someone else requires you to do, and not forcing your opinion over, but your opinion is firm, your opinion is direct, and your opinion is that is non-oppressive to our society in its completeness. And when we look at our society, we look at every aspect of our society. We look at the celebrity house, we look at poverty, we look at prostitutions, we look at fashion businesses, we looked at organizations and businesses that find themselves in the education department, in the university departments, in colleges, in schools, and in every part of our generation in the church function, and the requirement of different religions, different traditions, different family backgrounds. We are required to educate in the completeness of all of those colors. And when a Vogue educates on the social media pages and on the business pages, that this is where we find ourselves at in our season, we learn to listen to what is it that a Vogue says, rather than what do I want a Vogue to say, based on what office means, based on what business means, based on what RIBEA Elise maybe has to mean, based on what someone on social media needs to mean to say. We say that what is it that RIBEA Elise are saying in the season, because we have learned she's not a difficult person. We have learned she's not a person that is really oppressive. We have learned that she's not a person that really now wants other people abused or manipulated. We have learned that her education is firm and direct. We have learned that he's very open-minded with our opinion, and only based on where we find ourselves at and the person that we as office people has been introduced to. When REBEA found herself in different employments, when REBEA found herself in employment on different levels, we learned that because of her career history, because of the type of person that we were introduced to, we therefore allow ourselves to listen to that. That is the opinion of a person in our generation that has got something to say and where our generation finds themselves at. And that is where we want to start at what our discussion today. We're just going to take a little bit of a pause break here. And we have not done that before. I wonder if there is a live stream pause option. We're going to put the sound off and we're going to do that pause option because I am preparing to professionally prepare the videos. And I am going to educate myself on how to manage the live stream page while I'm busy. We just want to take a quiet break for 1 second. Let's please play for that. So what I want to now focus on is the office structure. We've mentioned this in last week's video. The office structure of our generation. We've mentioned required different management processes to be in place, right? The office structure requires different management processes to be in place. When we say different management processes, we look at the South African continent, or the South African part of African continent, or the South African country. But we want to look at the continent structure. Continent or the structure. We look at the South African government that finds themselves today. The South African ANC is the leading political party. The ANC only manages their part of South Africa, and the Afrikaner colored people manages their part of South Africa. Look at the ANC, and we look at the the ANC is the leading party, and the next, and the party that assists, or that is assisting the leading party, is what South Africa calls the DR. And when we look at the aggression that are being created in South Africa based on the structure, the management structure, and the process that needs to be implemented to lead the country in its completeness. I say that there is a process. And when the process are being implemented, process looks like 5 fingers. The process looks like this is Johannesburg, this is Cape Town, this is Bloemfontein, this is KwaZulu-Natal, this is Beaufort West. The process looks like this is Boland, Woolsley, Worcester. It includes different regions, the way South Africa has been educated. And I'm going to be firm because the education was direct. The education was not that it was excluding a part of South Africa. And when we look at how South Africa are structured, then we look at the requirement for the process to be managed in one house. This is one hand, this is one management process, and this management process has 5 fingers. And the education to humanity was not different. The education to humanity was not wrong. The education to humanity was never that humanity is going to have to tell Cape Town manage yourself and all the other areas manage themselves. It is that the process is this. And the process is this because when Mama Universe birthed REBEA Elise as the baby of Mama Anna Philander, the 7th-born baby, and of Papa Yapi, then Mama Universe meant for REBEA Elise to be not the Jesus of the process, but the bonus of the education line. From all of these different parts of the world, that is the education from the South African child. And then REBEA says, and on that day when my business is awoke, then I shall not be deprived to educate the world on my birthright in the requirement for the processes in this world to not be disruptive to any country where the children were all born from different countries. And when the requirement for South Africa to assist the international world with education is a requirement that is the every birthright of every South African child to educate in that process. Because every South African child finds themselves affected when the education in this world is disruptive. And on that day, we educate our political leaders that the circumstances in the country is not circumstances that cannot be managed or controlled. That the circumstances in our countries where someone else are educating from and are communicating from, that humanity on earth finds themselves in earth, but our communication, the way the earth is structured, the way the cities are drawn, the way the houses are built, the communication on this earth includes other parts of this universe that communicates from different countries also, that communicates to REBEA Elise, and when they communicate to REBEA Elise, and the education needs to be direct communication lines, then they cannot find themselves communicating to a Malvina in the Netherlands, where REBEA Elise is the birth child that are being communicated to regarding the process and regarding the education and regarding the family womb. They cannot communicate to a Aisha business when they need to speak to a Vogue business. They cannot tell the South African government that the process needs to be this, and that the South African government needs to employ people that understands the process of what needs to happen in South Africa as well as in international countries. We cannot find ourselves a world in aggression on this in the season based on apartheid, based on a different skin color, based on your father was a pastor, based on your hair needs to be this and that, and based on you need to have found yourself speaking and representing in this and that way. We cannot have the earth in such a disruptive way If the continent is that Africa is this, and that the different family lines came and they traveled from different parts of the world, and that every birthright of every educational child is what has government reasons, what is required in our countries as well as internationally. And then we employ the people that require to educate us through that season. We cannot still find ourselves having to deal with people who want to hold on to businesses and who want to hold on to leading in our countries. And then our countries are disruptive, in our countries are oppressive, in our countries are abusive. And when we look at the world in general, and the South African people that find themselves in management processes in South Africa, and that communicate disruptive in communications to different parts of the world. And if government cannot make a standpoint to employ people that exactly understands what's required to happen in South Africa, that does not be the person that tells you that because I was the whoever from wherever and my father was a pastor, I need to now say this and this and that. It is that you learn that this is RIBEA's introduction on social media. This is where the person RIBEA Elise speaks from. This is how she educates in a season. And only because of this, we need our countries and our generation of people to be educated in ways that they are going to learn to listen the one to the other, rather than wanting to say that because of this and that and that and that, I only want to build Africa for this and that person, and I only want to build South Africa for this and that person, and only Meghan Markle appears, and then RIBEA must wait for Meghan Markle to appear before a Vogue business can receive her funds, before a Vogue business can be representing and educating where she's required to be. When the world is so aggressive, then RIBEA Elise and that they cannot argue still with King Charles. RIBEA cannot argue still with Cyril Ramaphosa. RIBEA cannot argue still with the ISA business that wants to silence the Vogue business. But on that day, RIBEA blocked Melvina out of a page. RIBEA blocked ISA business out of a page. RIBEA blocked Cyril Ramaphosa out of contacting RIBEA. And RIBEA educates a generation of people. And that is the structuring required in our generation. And that day, our generation learns that when parliamentary leaders hold on to abusive requirements, then the society step in and the society manage processes in ways that are fair, in ways that are non-abusive, and in ways that are non-disruptive and non-manipulative in humanity in general and in the universe in general. Because when humanity on earth finds themselves aggressive and abusive, then they are disrupting other parts of the universe. We learn of the sensitivity of the animals on this earth. We learn that the communication on this earth is that, but the communication in this universe is that every part of this universe cannot be disrupted by humanity's aggression, and humanity therefore needs to allow people to educate a generation of people out of aggression, out of abuse, out of corruption, out of manipulation, out of depression and deprivation, and out of that is stirring people to be abused and people to go in prison for reasons that can many times be controlled and that can many times be preventative. And only because of that, I urge business owners to not be silent when you are educating in your season and you are being disrupted by a group of people and a group of leaders that want to force you out to be silent. I urge people to continue to educate through in your countries and continue to work with people that wants to work with the world without wanting to be aggressing the world. People that wants to work with that is provision, that is everyone finding themselves on earth, that is households not being in poverty on earth, that is households not being manipulated to be imprisoned, and that is households that are not finding themselves in apartheid abuses that South Africa also already stepped out of for many years ago. For those people who still want to find themselves wanting to create apartheid abuses, RIBEA Elise, South Africa many years ago came out of that apartheid season already. And South Africa is the baby born and the amazingness of all the family lines. And only because of that, South Africa is not gonna allow anyone to make apartheid international. Because when the baby is born in that is out of the apartheid era, then the international world that is forming the parents of the baby have to respect that. That is, the baby are not gonna be deprived or depressed into apartheid arguments. That countries already came out many years ago. So when it comes to the South African government, they have the ANC being the leading party, they have the DR being the assist leading party. And when the DR is the assist leading party with the ANC, and the processes that we have mentioned before, that all the governmental parliamentary house, different parties, political parties, find themselves in the management of the processes in the country in general. And when the processes are being managed, the processes are going to be managed in a way that not the ANC or the DR are going to disrupt the country in any way. Because all the different political assist parties that is also forming part of the DR processes, part of the ANC processes, part of the country in general, but then that finds themselves as assist parties in the country, are therefore representing in firm ways that makes them equalize to the ANC party and the DR party in one political voice and opinion. So while the ANC forms an opinion and the DR forms an opinion, and the opinion is that the ANC wants to manage one part of South Africa and the DR political party wants to manage the other part of South Africa, then the other political assist parties, that is now not the 50% voice of the ANC and the 20% voice of the DR, but that each forms themselves as the overruling percentage party. That opinion is then direct, and that opinion are then required to be firm in South Africa. That the process of management required is that the silence of the ANC and silence of the DR required when the processes needs to include everyone in South Africa in its completeness. Therefore, then the DR has got the political, rather the other assist parties has got the political right to then call the DR and the ANC being one political party, and the ruling party then becomes the assist parties, that it forms the 30% of South African people, that is then not the 20% of the DR and the 30% of the ANC, but that forms part of the percentage that equalize to 100%, and that is then the 30% plus 20% gives you 50%, and that is then these other assist parties then forms 50%, and the 50% assist teams then have the one opinion that they are then ruling the government, they are then managing the house, they are then managing the processes based on the DR and the ANC that forms themselves in one opinion, and the society's right is then to have that requirement that the processes in the country are managed in a way that includes everyone in the country. And then the right of the assist parties in government should then be that the assist parties, that is now not the DR and the ANC alone, but that has the overruling voice and opinion in the country, because it's the society and the broader society of the country, and the opinion is therefore that opinion that forms part of 90%, and the DR and the ANC then forms part of the 10% of the country, and the overruling opinion is that the governmental leaders, that is the ruling party, and the assist ruling party, that is the DR, forms 10%, and the 10% then has to listen to the opinion of the assist parties. And that is how government and our South African government was meant to be structured. And that is how the house should be managed, so that no government can stir aggression in a country, and so that no governmental political leader and political group can overrule their opinion when the people of the country finds themselves being oppressed by an overruling opinion that many people have voted for, the reasons for voting was different to how the circumstances in the country is in the current state. I always educate on a vote business that we find ourselves listening to what is the current state of our countries. Very educated directly from a vote. You'll know I'm very experienced and I'm very educated, and I very know how I sense the circumstance and how it should actually be. And I'm very firm on that. So what I'm explaining is not something that I've listened to someone saying, because I do not listen to books and I do not listen to recordings, but it's directly educated to me on earth, where I find myself at my education season in the vote business, and my explanation is exactly that, that when you listen to it, you exactly can listen to what it is that I mean, and you exactly can sense the right in the process, and the fact that the process is non-abusive to the people. Remember, when we look at government and we look at the society of people and we look at wars in the world, okay, let me just draw that. You look at government, you look at the society of people that finds themselves at the everyday human beings in countries, and you look at war in the world. And when you look at those three parts of different opinions, government forms leadership of countries. When leadership of countries aggresses countries, then the aggression turns into war, and the aggression sometimes are exactly war. A vote calls aggression, and REBEA ELISE calls aggression war. REBEA ELISE doesn't call it a war, she calls it aggression. Why? Because when you find yourself being in anger with someone, that means you are in an argumentative mindset, in an argumentative state. And when you are in an argumentative state, then you're going to be arguing and you're going to be fighting with someone in an argumentative state. And you are going to find yourself in that state until you get yourself out of the argumentative state of where you find yourself at. And when you find yourself in that argument, that is what is called on earth a war. A war sometimes is a process that only happens when people are arguing. And you don't hear the argument and you don't see the argument, because government leads it in a way that is, the argument is not visible. No one can see this argument, but everyone just sees this war happening. And REBEA educates a generation of people, and REBEA says that the requirement is this, that stop the aggression. That do not be argumentative, that when someone's opinion are different and you cannot listen to them, do not argue with them, but find yourself out of the aggression state, that is the war state that you find yourself in. But in the communication of the human brain, it is aggression and it is argument. Argument is on a human level, physically, a fight happening because of an argument, because you are an aggression and because you are arguing with someone. And on a mental state, it is that you find yourself constantly arguing. And on an earth human state, that is called, in a generation of people that are finding themselves in aggression, they then find themselves in a war state. And the only thing that humanity need to do is do not argue with REBEA. I always say, do not argue with whoever is arguing with you, whatever country it is that differs with you. Find a way to discuss a matter rather than preparing yourself and telling yourself that I want to fight the vote business. And then REBEA says, but who's all these people fighting me? And what are all these people talking about? And why are all these people so aggressive to a vote business? Because they don't know REBEA the person. They've got all of these pictures that they're painting about me. That's a vote picture. This is REBEA ELISE. This is a vote business. This is where I represent from. That's my Mona Lisa education, the type of person that presents to you, and that we're on the day with the hair weave in, with the light on, and then the skin color is exactly that, and then the smile is exactly that, and then everything, the hair weave and the attitude and the reaction in the education is exactly the long hair type of person. But some people in the world want to look at the long hair, they want to have the light on, they want to see you stand in the sun, they want to see the lighter skin color in order to agree with the vote business, and that the vote businesses business's profile photo, and the representative photo is now a Vogue business's photo, and some people still find themselves addressing themselves because of a Vogue business and because of RIBEA ELISE in a Vogue business. And on that day, a generation of African people says, this is a hair weave, this is a big smile, this is a moist smile, this is a gorgeous smile, this is a not so gorgeous smile, this is the color of the skin, and when I stand in the sun, then it's more visible, when I sit under a light, then it's more visible, and this is me, but this type of person is actually this type of person. And many people tend to want to argue with you, and then on that day, you do not argue with them, but you find yourself with your business and that represents that you own, and that you say that this is a Vogue business and I'm firm, yes, and I'm very direct, but this is my business and I own exactly that, because that's exactly me, the type of person that I am. And sometimes you do not have to find yourself having to explain that, but a generation has to learn that when the government and the leaders are aggressed, and the war state is that because of the aggression, the society's opinion is that the society says that we are therefore required to, that the society's opinion are that we are required to be non-aggressive. We are required to be having our opinion that is non-oppressive to the other, and we are required to allow ourselves to listen the one to the other's opinion rather than being in anger of where we find ourselves at. And the current state of the country is therefore then that the society's ruling then overrules the government voice, and it overrules that there is someone that wants to maybe start war, and there is someone that wants to maybe aggress the society, and the society's opinion is then that of the assist parties, that is not ANC and that is not DR, because ANC is arguing, DI is arguing, and they are working together. Then all the other assist parties forms part of the society's opinion, that is mankind's opinion in general, and that is the everyday person that requires to be fine, and that the circumstance can be managed in a way that if the ANC can't manage it fine, and the DR's opinion is that is oppressive to the people, then the people's right is that the people then requires the assist parties to listen to the people in general, and to then voice for the people in general. Remember, the assist parties is now not the DR, but the assist parties is now all the other political parties that also forms part of the parliamentary house. The ANC is the ruling house. The DR gives the ANC a hand out to say that y'all can also rule with us and do what we want to do. And then the people in the country find themselves endangered, and in war aggressions, and in argument, and in gun shootings, and in crimes. And then the people's right is to say that the assist parties are required to voice for the protectiveness of the people in the country, and therefore the DR has to be silent in such a circumstance, and the ANC has to be silent, so that the society has the right to now request that that is the protective requirement for the society's opinion. And that is what is, and having to be educated on an international level, but from the South African child. The South African child forms himself part of all of these family lines, and the requirement is that in a state of war, then the people's opinion is important, and the governmental leaders as processes of office and so the governmental leaders in a war state has the opinion that's legislation. And when humanity's life are endangered, then legislation finds themselves being silent out, because humanity has the right to be protected where they find themselves at. And when the government's right has to be that the government's requirement of a legislative process where the people are endangered in the process is that the government then has to be silent, and the people's right is that the people has the right to be ending the war, and to be in that finds themselves as their opinion is that our lives are endangered, and therefore we cannot find ourselves in a legislative process, and where government legislatively manages a war, and the people's requirement and right as a human being in a society, and that circumstance is that government be silent, and that the people's request what they want, and that the people has the right to end the war where the war are at, and government leaders has to deal with the situation in such a way that is non-aggressive, non-abusive to society in general. And that's what was meant to be educated in South Africa, but South Africa must never has the right to employ anyone that they have to. They had so much opportunity to employ REBEA Elise to educate them in these processes, but they were so much arguing with me that I can't even explain the amount of emails that I've emailed the government about all of these processes. And so what needs to happen is the society's right? So that's the society's right. The society's right is under circumstances that the human being finds themselves endangered on earth, then the human being has a right to legislatively in the legislative process of a war, aggression, and they have the requirement and they have the right, the rights of them is to request that people and that their voice be that ends the war, rather than the political leader's voice. That the political leader is going to find themselves constantly in the discussion room and constantly in the argumentative room, and the societies, the country's people that are being endangered. And when the country's people find themselves in danger, then they have the right to call the war leadership team, the governmental leaders, into silence, and they have the right to manage the process in a way that is fine for the people in general. If the people of the country does not step out and act and request the war and the political leader to be silenced in the circumstance, then the people in the country finds themselves agreeing with the process that is the war state of a country. And therefore, those are the processes that we need to focus on when we look at the Russia-Ukrainian war, when we look at the society's opinion, when we look at governmental leaders that want to manage the process in a legislative way and that want to discuss the aggressions in both countries, and both countries find themselves endangered, and that the political house has to silence out, and the society's right is that they can request to voice their own opinion and to speak up for that they request that the governmental leaders end the war and they discuss the matter in a different way, rather than having the society and the human being endangered by the legislative requirement of the law process. Only because of the legislative requirement in war, the process can be called to an end, and the process can be managed in a way that the war does not continue, but that the political leaders find themselves in discussing and legislatively managing what the issue at hand is. And the people's right is that they call the war to an end and they request the right of protection, the human right as a human being. And that's why in the human resources we used to call it a human process. The employee's right and the employer's right. And in a war circumstance, when you have to look at a war circumstance and you have to listen to what is it that is the legislative part of war and what is it that is the human person that are being abused in the war process. And then the human right is that they can opinion for themselves and request the war to end and request their political leader to silence out while they request an end to the war in their countries. When it comes to ANC and DR, the ANC and the DR then has to be silenced out, and the leading assist political team leaders in South Africa has the right to then request their opinion to be heard so that the processes in South Africa can be managed in a way that is fair for everyone of South Africa. That's the office structure of the management process that we need to have in place. When we look at society, we look at the completion of the business and we completion of the office, we look at the requirement for the process to be managed in a way that is society find themselves endangered in circumstances where governmental leaders' opinions are oppressive to the human being in countries, and society then has the right for their opinion to be heard and for the political team to listen to the restructured required, and the political team has to look at and listen at the protective right of the people, rather than they need to look at the crime rate. Yes, they need to look at the aggression in the country, and they need to listen to what is the people's requirement, what needs to be put in place, and they need to put in place that there is going to not be aggressive and there is going to be protective for every individual in the country. Another thing that we wanted to discuss before we set out for the day and for this Monday is, while we are at that I only wanted to focus on the structuring of the political house and the parliamentary house, because if we get the processes, the basic processes, in a way that it doesn't stir so much aggression, then it forms part of so much more processes that can be right in the country. Another process that we want to focus on is the international communication that forms part of our social media business. That is now not social media, but that forms part of the internet communication, the social communications of humanity in general. Social communications are Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter in all the countries. And the processes are also managed and having to be managed by the parliamentary house. And when you look at the different apps, you learn that every app in the country has the requirement for the communication line internationally to be better, and for humanity to find themselves in a communication that is fine for everyone. Because many years there was not communication lines that were proper, and the information was not given through to other countries. That also forms part sometimes of management processes in certain countries. And because of that, it has caused so much war and aggressions that in these years, every country and every people had the right to have social media, and the processes was then so that the communications of what is aggressing people in countries can then be managed, and so that it can be discussed on an international level in a political house, and so that people's opinions can be listened to internationally. And therefore social media was implemented so that everyone's opinion and why there's aggression in countries, rather than listening from the information from a political house, they gave humanity the right to give their opinion on what is it that finds you aggressed in the country, what is your circumstances in the country, so that the international world do not have to go into wars, so that in the international world do not have to be aggressed, so that the international world do not have to find themselves so oppressed with where they're at. We have learned that the social media apps were implemented. Most of the important social media apps are Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn and YouTube. So yes, the 5 social media apps. Those are your most important communication lines. LinkedIn forms part of the office communication lines. Facebook and Instagram is on a more not a serious business level, but it forms part of the every society's opinion. YouTube forms part of the requirement of mankind to accept one another the way that mankind is, and the communications are then in different ways. Twitter also forms part of office communication, but also part of every part of office in our generation. There is now office that is your fashion business, office that is your entertainment business, office that is your music expertise, offers that is every part of offers of humanity in general. And when we look at the different apps and we look at the requirement that the apps needs to be managed in a way that is non-aggressive to humanity, but the apps are not gonna abuse or not gonna exclude humanity's opinion out, because the reason for the apps was so that wars can be prevented and so that the communication line can be clear, because the information that goes to other countries are sometimes not the correct information as the circumstances that is happening in countries. And the requirement for social media managers to be managing the process in the way that they learn that the app was actually created so that the communication line of humanity can be better on earth, and so that humanity can communicate with one another in different countries, and so that humanity can be attentive to what is happening in the world, and so that humanity can learn to be open-minded on how they reason on earth, being human beings on earth. And when humanity were educated on all the different nationalities, our different ways of dressing, our different ways of lifestyle choices, and humanity were required to learn to accept one another the way that we are on earth, then the office teams that manages the process were required to look at business owners, to have business owners be registered, to have business owners that educate also and in line with the processes be educating on the social media pages. And the social media business owners was then required to work with everyone in the country that are business owners that are educating on their social media pages and that are educating processes that goes in line with the communication line on earth that needs to be better. Then social media owners was meant to work with humanity in that way. And therefore, we in this season, in my opinion, based on how I've learned what is happening on social media, my opinion is exactly that we educate social media business owners that doesn't understand the app. Vogue educates exactly what the apps are mostly about. And my Instagram app exactly educates mostly inclusive of everything that REBEA Elise speaks from, and that is my opinion in season. So when you go through my Instagram, Vogue REBEA, when you go through my Instagram page, REBEA, RIBEA, then you learn that I exactly educate on what is required for Instagram, how Instagram finds themselves sometimes challenged at, and the requirement for our opinion to be that we educate people to not be aggressed when someone else is different than you. And when business owners look at our Instagram pages and they learn where we're educating from, then they should be in that is working with businesses that are educating our generation. Out of that, there are war states and there are abusivenesses and there are poverties in certain countries. And they should therefore also share our information in ways that are fair for people in different countries to listen to, that finds themselves in argumentative war states that has yet learned what the war and what the aggressions in their countries are about. And when we learn that social media owners are even arguing with humanity and with the society in general, then humanity has the right to request different social media owners and different social media management teams to manage these processes that goes in line with the requirement of mankind to find themselves in ways on earth that are the one not abusive to the other. And those are processes that I want to educate on as well. With our next season of business restructuring, it is that we want our processes to be not silent out, because our processes are that are the requirement to restructure our generations out of oppressive ways and out of apartheid ways and out of abusive ways. Our processes are then required to be implemented in ways that when we look at social media, we look at REBEA Elise's business page on social media, or when we look at social media, we look at REBEA Elise's Instagram page, and we learn that such is the colors of this world, that such is a requirement, and that such is a generation of people that have to be fine and that has to find themselves fine on earth. Even if their choices are different, we have to educate that thoroughly through, and we work with people, that's businesses are that is fine for everyone, and that educates a fine environment for everyone. And therefore, when we learn that social media has to work hand in hand with governmental officers, so that governmental leaders hand in hand knows and learns the requirements in countries and how the processes should be managed, not in-house, but also on an international level. Remember, social media doesn't only form part of your in-house opinion where you find yourself at, but the international countries that listens to your opinion. And therefore, when you find yourself, like REBEA Elise, I find myself in Auckland, New Zealand. So Auckland, New Zealand's government does not have a say to silence REBEA out based on the circumstances in Auckland, unless REBEA is finding herself in crime, and unless REBEA finds herself in abusive ways that the Auckland government finds that the Vogue business page or REBEA Elise's page is abusive to the country, then they can find ways to work with REBEA Elise in general. But other than that, the Auckland business and Auckland political leaders' requirement is that REBEA Elise's voice is not necessarily for the Auckland person. She might find herself in Auckland, but it is sometimes for people who find themselves in Africa Africa in poverty, who finds themselves in Muslim countries in poverty, who finds themselves in European countries in poverty. And the opinion of that is that RIBEA's voice are not only that's required for the Auckland people, but that is required for the international situation in the world in general. And that's why we call it social media. We do not call it social media to focus on the country that you are in. No. Otherwise, we could have done that person-in-person education. We call it social media because it has mainly got to do with international communications of where people find themselves in challenged at and where the world learns everyone from everyone on a daily basis. That's basically what we're going to focus on today. And when you look at the South African circumstance and then what we said about the ANC, South Africa needs to get it right in country, but our education is not going to be that we leave at that. We're going to probably do it what we share also on our weekly podcast, where we're going to focus then in the podcast of the listener that listens to our videos, listens on our Facebook live stream video. They then go to the podcast, because on the podcast we then take the education to that is the international world. When we look at ANC, DR, and the sister parties, we're then going to discuss the international world and the education requirement of the structuring of the international world. When the international world has to communicate the one to the other, and the processes has to be managed in ways in countries that are fine and protective, the one country for the other, and humanity having to be fine in countries. And then we're going to do the same education, but we're doing it in a structured way. On our podcast, we explain it in an international way to the international listener. So you will find yourself having to listen to our podcast on a weekly basis. We're going to do the podcast probably later today or tomorrow morning. And what we then focus on the podcast, it's also the same podcast. It's Leading This Generation Weekly. And then we focus on the international part of it. Remember, HR2023, based on the officeness of where we are educating from, the live stream video, and the international having to listen to what are we explaining, is the Leading This Generation podcast. That is the weekly podcast that we also explain thoroughly. That is it for where we are at with our HR 2023, our business restructuring with RIBEA Elise. Have an amazing week further.